most households, the way the economy is set up in very broad terms, two incomes is, very important, even if you are living bare minimum. And so that makes homeschooling challenging. And so that's why I am interested in these alternative options.
Yeah.
And I guess, we're already kind of started talking. Just kind of tell us who you are and, what you do.
Right. Absolutely. So Sam Taylor, born in a small cottage in the hills of Appalachia. Not true.
Okay. I was like, wait, no, this is going to be awesome.
This is good.
No, born in Knoxville, Tennessee. So not quite.
Okay,
as,
that's cool though. I still like that.
Yeah, go Vols. So I grew up in Tennessee. Both my parents were educators, actually. Okay. So my mom taught for 35 years.
Wow.
She taught elementary and middle. And my dad is still an elementary school principal. So 50 years in education, still coaching elementary school basketball, was my coach, 500 years ago kind of thing,
You look pretty good then.
I use a lot of the night cream or really the fine lines down, all that stuff. Yeah.
Retinol.
Right.
Sure.
Right. So, my parents taught. I was a product of public school, small town Tennessee, and loved it. Honestly, I had a great experience growing up. Now, what I will say is Morristown is the town that I grew up in. Those teachers, by and large, really cared. We were all on the same, it's funny you mentioned the economics of it, because we were all pretty much on the same socioeconomic level, right? Mm-hmm. Some folks worked the line, some folks taught. Mm-hmm. You had folks who were cops, you had folks who worked in the banks, but there was nobody in my class whose dad was earning seven figures, right? Whose dad was earning $500,000 for that matter, mm-hmm. right? We were all very much in the same bucket. A lot of us went home. We had hay to bale in the summer, things like that. And there's a camaraderie there that I think transcends so much of, it's part of what bothers me now with all this discussion about race and class and everything else. Like, you just realize the socioeconomics of it, we all got along. You had white kids, you had black kids, you had everybody there together. And would we fight on occasion? Sure, right? It was a fight in the bathroom, and then it was done. It was a simpler time, which is totally different from what I see now. But I jumped across the mountain, left the state for college. So I went to school in Chapel Hill, moved to Charlotte afterwards because that's where all the jobs were. Mm-hmm. Essentially, you either went to Raleigh and you worked public, or you moved to Charlotte and you worked private. And I've been in Charlotte now for, gracious, get that right, about 20 years, give or take.
Okay.
So I've been out of Tennessee longer than I grew up in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So am I still a Tennessean? I had to put Tennessee native as a sticker on my car now, just to make sure. I'm like, yes, I don't live there anymore, but I'm still a native. I still claim it. That's right. So about 20 years working corporate America, between a consulting firm, had 14 and a half years at Bank of America, had 4 years at Wells Fargo. And since August, I have been at Freedom Academy. So really functioning in two roles, director of kids for Freedom House Church, but primary responsibilities are as well for the academy as the director of operations there. I also get to be the PE teacher, for the record. So
PE.
Nice.
Yes, so that which gets taken very seriously. So that is a daily activity. So we wear them out, burpees and squats.
Good.
And,
good.
Listen, there was a responsibility to educate the body and the mind. So there you go. Mm.
I like that. I like the PT aspect.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Great stuff.
Yep.
But I think with Freedom Academy, I know that there's a reason why it was brought about. And can you just kind of explain how that happened?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely can. For me, I'll give you a little of the backstory with me for it too. It was December. It was the last day of school at my daughter's school, my oldest daughter. And she was so excited. She was dressed up for the Christmas party. And when she got there, she had forgotten her mask because it was still a requirement. Mm-hmm. And she broke down crying. She was in tears. She was very upset. We were in drop-off line. And I was so sad for her. First, my heart broke, the fact that was even a conversation. Secondly, what infuriated me was the fact that this was still a requirement at the school. I'd had the chance to speak to the board multiple times saying can we please acknowledge the foolishness of this? Can we, if people want to wear them, that's fine, but we shouldn't mandate it. And so there was some righteous anger there. And then as things continued happening, and I watched things happen in the public school, you watch just with, in particular, boys getting into girls' sports, litter boxes and litter boxes in bathrooms. 1,000 crazy things a day, it felt like. I had sent a note to one of our senior pastors saying, look, if Freedom House ever wants to open a school or anything that is giving an alternative to public education, I want to be part of it. Like, I want to have input into it. I want to do whatever I can do to help, because there is a need there, there is a market there, and there is a reality that we've got to do something, I think. And if that happens, I would love to be part of it. And what was amazing was how God moved from that moment on. And it's something that I know our senior pastors at Freedom House had thought about and had talked about for a long time, but I think they realize, and I give Pastor Penny Maxwell tremendous credit there. She saw that there absolutely was a need to give people an alternative to public school. And there's got to be a place where we can speak biblical values over people. We can celebrate the importance of American patriotism, and we can still help people learn and learn in an exemplary fashion, right? So that was really the genesis of it. And as we started going back and forth and talking, it took the shape of, okay, what does that look like? And as we talked through some of those options, we landed on, well, realistically, what if we did a homeschool co-op that operated in a university-style model, where we have a chance where parents are part of it, very active parts of it, because they need to be, right? Your parents are obviously an active part of every aspect of your education. And we've got days on site, we've got days off site, so that they're actually at home. The parents are part of that. They understand, they know what their students are learning. They're able to work with their kids. They're talking directly to the teachers. And we give that social aspect, something we were talking about there before we got going in earnest. There's the social aspect between field trips, between PE, between service projects, all those different pieces. But we've also got a chance to really give them great academics that the parents can also help teach, which is why we chose the curriculum we did, because we felt that that's one that parents could also support, so that it was a seamless transition for the kids. They were exposed to multiple adults. They were exposed to multiple teaching styles. And in that, they truly had the opportunity to learn at their pace.
Which curriculum did you guys end up going with?
So we went with Abeka.
Okay.
Yep.
I grew up on that one until about 6th grade, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, I chose it for a couple of reasons. The biggest, what I loved about Abeka was it harkened, first and foremost, it harkened back to me. This felt a lot closer to what I learned. And I felt like I received a good education. I think in high school, there were some things that were hit or miss there for sure. But kindergarten through 8th, I felt like I really was grounded in what I needed to know to be successful. And Abeka had that feel to it. I also loved the nature of, parents, you can read this and teach your kids this, even if you've never taught homeschool before. And we can help you in that journey. But this way, there's a continuity there. And I've been pleased with what I've seen. I think it's been fascinating with our teachers. They've got tremendous amounts of experience. They've taught in different curriculums. There are some things that I think that they supplement. Well, I know they supplement because they think this is, we think some other groups may teach this a little better, but by and large, I like the way in which Abeka approaches learning from a scope and sequence perspective year on year. Yeah,
I remember I liked them for a while, but when I hit 6th grade, they got to a learning point that my parents were just like, we can't help you with this. Right. My mom never went. She graduated high school, never went to college. My dad took some courses and dropped out and went to work. So I think somewhere around 6, I started floundering around trying to find alternative homeschooling methods, which Abeka had a DVD series at one point.
Yeah.
It was awful. It was awful because this is what was odd, is like they recorded it in a school.
Yep.
So it seemed like it was a public school setting where kids would read and stuff. And I was initially a slow reader. I didn't start reading until I was like eight years old, which I was behind. And when I did start reading, I was much quicker than these students. So it's like they took forever to read chapters, and I'm like, I can be done with my whole assignment right now. So I would pause the video, go through it, skip to the questions, but it's like I went from having homeschool days where I would get up at 6 and I'd be done at about 11 o'clock, like everything, to still being there at 5 p.m. in the day because the DVD sets were just so long.
That's tough.
And after that, we tried some online school, and then eventually we moved to kind of an amalgam of stuff. So we had some Abeka curriculum. I had Bob Saxon for math. I went through their math book and I liked it. I liked the way they taught it and
Hated
structured it.
Saxon math. Hated.
You
Saxon
don't seem like a
math.
math person at all. But it's like
Listen,
Abeka math
you're
like
not-
started losing me
Right.
at some point.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I'm an Asian that can't do math. It's embarrassing.
I mean, I think
But
I think it's one of those that if you take the time, there's a reality that every curriculum probably has one thing in particular they're super strong at.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think you're going to find anybody that whether it's Bob Jones, whether it's whoever, there's going to be something that they excel at, and I think I would brag on Abeka because they've introduced a lot of different concepts, things like Pro Teach now, where it's they've done a good job. Because we watch through some of those lessons and we use some of that teaching because we do within our classrooms currently, we've got 2 grades that are in a classroom. So as we're doing teaching on one, there's either independent work or potentially some of that is supplemental information, some of that video. And I do think, I haven't seen the DVDs, so I can't speak to those. What I will say is the stream that they have now, I find very effective. And I think, and I also think quick. I remember watching the first one thinking, holy moly, I'm in my mid-40s, but if I were 7 years old, would I have gotten all that? I don't actually know, right? Baby. So, but, I think similarly, but it's another reason I liked it was it's a big and broad enough curriculum that we have the ability to supplement people that need additional assistance, but we can also, people can work ahead some too if they need a little more challenge, and we've got folks at all, as any school does, irrespective, public, private, charter, you name it, people are at all levels. And
I'd love to see what they're doing now because I've been out of that curriculum for well over
For
a
a
decade.
while.
now.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's been a bit.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm incorrect, is that there seems to be a certain level of flexibility and some level of individualization towards each student in regards to getting parents involved. So parents, they know their child, right?
Right.
They know their child well, and so if they're involved in what they're doing, if they know they're struggling, there's communication with the teacher.
Yep.
I imagine. So that's something that's a little bit different. Because typically when I think, again, I'm going off of my stereotypical public school of like, it's all just the same and we all go along. And I was like, man, I wish we could slow down. Or it's like, oh man, I wish I could go faster. It seems like, and tell me if I'm wrong, it seems like there's a little bit of flexibility in that.
So, and I would say yes. And I think the statement I would make first is, there are a lot of exceptional public school teachers out there.
For sure.
I think the challenge becomes when you've got 34 kids in a class.
Yeah.
There is a finite amount of individual attention you can give. The academy is certainly smaller than that. So I think that fosters an atmosphere that's much more conducive to individualized instruction. So I would say it's a couple of things for us. We have a structured routine. Here's the expectations from when you arrive. Here's morning meeting. Here's your morning work. Here are the afternoon kind of fitness activities, and then the late afternoon specials. So there's and with that, if we need to take 5 extra minutes here or there, if people need a brain break and there's 10 minutes to walk around the lake, we can make all that's up to the teacher. What my goal as the director, my goal has always been, I want to give, I approach it the same way I think about what the federal government should do. Here are your base rules that I expect, right?
Sure.
And then you do, each classroom is a state. This is what I'm expecting. This is what we federate, but everything else, you're going to know your students better than I'm ever going to know them, right? I get the chance to teach them in chapel. I get the chance to teach them in PE. I speak to them every morning, but you know what your kids need. I want you to have the flexibility to push them, to work them, to do different things. And I always like the first level of communication to be between the parent and the classroom teacher. So, I mean, to me, that's essential because I don't ever want a parent coming to me that establishes an undercurrent, right? Now, if they cannot resolve it, then absolutely, I need to be part of that, right? Because we want to make sure the child is looked after and that everybody is clear how we're marching forward. But the parents and the teachers need to be joined at the hip. This is what we're learning. This is what your child needs to focus on the homeschool day. This is what they're really struggling with, or this is what they're excelling at. And so I want you to push them in this regard, that regard. That is definitely something we encourage. And parents are an active part of it. We've got them there helping us with art. We've got it there helping us with PE. They're helping us as we're set up, break down, setting things up. If we've built our library, our initial, the Freedom Academy library, and so parents were going through those books. First off, are they complete? Are they age appropriate? Secondly, let's get them in the different groups and buckets so that kids can self-serve, things like that. So my view is there's got to be, that partnership has got to exist, especially if you think about, we were talking about different models, right? And if you think about, you've got some university co-ops, they go 3 days on, 2 days off. Some could go 2 days on, 3 days at home. Whatever that is, the reality is, if it is not broadly consistent at home and at school or whatever facility you're leveraging, something's going to fall apart. Something's going to suffer. And typically it's going to gravitate to the lowest common denominator. So that's why our goal is to start at a high standard and elevate that standard over the course of the academic year.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And I like what you said too, in regards to public school teachers, because I'd hate, it must be hard for good public school teachers to watch some of the crazy things that happen. And I'm sure it absolutely just bugs the heck out of them that happens. And so there are wonderful public school teachers that are bound to a certain extent by the system. And they're also bound to how many, if you put 30, 35 kids in a class and you don't have parental involvement, you're gonna struggle. You're gonna be burned out, and there's only so much you can do. And so I think with the model that you're putting out, and there's other models that can too, but you're putting the parent back in the equation, and that makes a significant difference.
Yeah, I think so, and I think I feel like it's not just the parent. I want to put the country back in the curriculum, because I feel like that is. I feel like some things just are inviolate to me. You stand for the flag, you stand for the pledge. Those things. And so it's reintroducing that and reintroducing the why. One of the things that we do every morning is we do this day in history. So I'll go through.
Oh, that's kind of fun. I like that.
Yeah, no, I like that.
That's cool.
And so I give them the 2 or 3 things that, obviously there's a myriad options to choose from. I will pick 2 or 3 that I think typically are most relevant to them, and I will explain the why. So, and we and if you think about where we're at, there have been a lot of great ones that have focused around the American Revolution, that have focused around, John Jay being the first Supreme Court justice, these different pieces that I've been able to talk about the importance of civics in our role in it, right? We're not just, even if you're not in office, you're not a bystander, right? You have a responsibility, to vote. So we actually, one of the first things we did was hold student council elections. Even though we're a small school, we want president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and so they had their campaign speeches, and they enjoyed that part. I'm like, okay, now you have to start planning activities. So because it's not just so, and so that, but I give them and there was a deer in headlights moment out of the gate, but I give them tremendous credit because they have been speaking to the class. They've been giving handouts. We just finished our first fundraiser for Operation Christmas Child. So what I've endeavored to do there is to bring the importance of civics and the importance of some of our historical traditions, and then most importantly, God, and bringing God back into it. Understanding we're gonna have Bible verses, we're gonna have chapel every week. I'm gonna pray over you. If you're hurting, we're gonna start with prayer before we put the Band-Aid, unless you're gushing blood, kind of thing. We got to do some triage.
Sure.
But so much of it is the things that helped found this nation, that made us successful. I just feel like we've walked away from so much of that. And I do feel like that is a differentiator with Freedom Academy. And that's when we're very upfront. Like we focus on exemplary academics, American patriotism, and a Bible-centered Christian worldview. So that's one of those that, and we don't debate those, right? So every student is interviewed and their family together. Like here is the statement of beliefs. Here is what we're going to do. We will broker no discussion on this.
Well, and I think that's the biggest difference is, if with some public schools, not all, but with some public schools, they're indoctrinating your kids and you don't know what it is.
Correct.
In this case, you are making the parents well aware, like, hey, we love America.
Correct.
We love the Lord first and foremost, and we're going to instill these values into here. So they are aware. So if they want to walk away, they can walk away.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a big difference. Now I want to play devil's advocate because
Sure.
I think it's going to be fun.
All right, sure.
Because I just want to think about our perhaps other viewers that are like, we're not on board with this.
Sure.
And like this sounds, I don't even know how this became a buzzword after January 6th. Christian nationalist,
right? Yes, exactly.
And I think there's some people that take it very serious. Like, this is Christian nationalism. You're indoctrinating them with thinking that America is the best, and this is not a good thing. We're on colonized land. I'm putting out some not legitimate arguments, but arguments that I've definitely heard the other side say. And so to that, would you speak to some of those arguments for me?
Yeah. So I think it's very fair. I think my position on it is I've had the privilege to live and work on several different continents. So, and it is my opinion, but I would argue I think America is the greatest nation on the planet.
Having been to a couple different nations.
Having been to a lot of them. And I think
you said you lived in Singapore for a year,
lived
right?
in Singapore for a year, lived in the UK for a couple of years, had a chance to live in Spain for a bit. So I've had a chance to live and see a lot. And so I think before we start with that conversation of you're indoctrinating our kids, you're brainwashing our kids, I think my response would be, have you been to any of these places that espouse the political systems or ideologies that you feel are right or strong? And I think
that's a very good question.
And I think the answer will normally be no, right? I would imagine if you just look at the number of Americans with passports, the answer, if they're being intellectually honest, is no. And that is one of those that is not me speaking on a high horse or from an ivory tower. I've seen it. I've had the chance to go to India, and it's mind-blowing, the level of poverty there. I've had the chance to go to Egypt, which honestly felt like the poorest of all the places that I've had the privilege of going to and seeing. But I say all that to say, people act like America is a terrible place and there's so much that we've got to destroy. America is not perfect. Don't get me wrong. It is not perfect.
Sure.
But the things that we fuss about and that we call being oppressed, when you look at what's happening in Iran is a great example. And who knows what's really happening because you can only see so much of it.
Sure,
and I think that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much of it. And I feel like I have a very short level of patience with people who say that you're indoctrinating our kids on this, because my response is always, well, because of the people who have fought and died because of that flag, because of what we have done as a nation, you are able to say what you're saying now, whereas in most countries, you would not have that freedom, right? And if we were to just follow the ideology that you're espousing, I think you would find that you wouldn't have near the freedoms that you do, and you would regret what you're espousing now. So, in terms of standing for the flag, that's a good example to me. There are some things that I think just unite us. But when we were founded as a nation, we didn't have a big army. We didn't have a lot, right? But what we did have was symbols that united us, that brought us together. And they helped keep us together early on when we were just building the republic. And then as we started finding our feet in the global economy, in the global world. And admittedly, the world has changed tremendously in the last 250 years, but there are also some simple things that we just have to be able to agree on. And so that's what I dig deep into is let's have a conversation about what happens if we go down the path you're espousing. Green energy is a great example, right? It's those different pieces of, I hear what you're saying, but somebody who's making $35,000 a year that has to drive 45 miles to work every day, they can't pay $7 a gallon for gas, right? Or buy a Tesla. Like those aren't options.
Yeah, common sense stuff.
Right.
know.
So I will say, and I will pause after this, I think so many political arguments, in my opinion, could be solved if we just really agreed on two things, which is voter ID and term limits. Mm-hmm. So those are my incendiary statements that I think career politicians, that was never how the government was set up. George Washington proved that when he stepped away, right? That's not what we're going for. And so I think so much of it is educating people what America is, what makes America great, and how all of us have got a responsibility to keep it great. And we may change tax categories, we may change trade agreements, we may trade embargoes, we may trade who our friends are, who we're going to go to war for, things like that. I understand all that, but some things are inviolate, which is the importance of understanding why your vote matters and why everybody has a responsibility to either run for office, campaign for office, speak in moments like this. But everybody carries weight other than just shouting at each other about how I'm so oppressed, everything's been taken away from me. So I hope that answered the question in some regard.
It was, well, I kind of asked, I threw the kitchen sink at you,
Right.
and so I couldn't expect you to answer all of that because it's kind of a lot. But you touched on a lot of important things. I think what you said in the beginning was important, of saying, well, what it would look like if we did these values that you really want, and it's a basic question, very, very basic. And at the end of the day, and conservatives can do it sometimes too, where we don't understand some of our own history. That's one thing I'm trying to get better at. I
think that's fair.
Is learning our own history. But it's a good solid question, and I think there's another thing that you spoke to in a bit. You didn't say it directly, but a certain level of ungratefulness, I think, is probably a good term. And I think gratefulness can come from a good education about where we've come from,
right,
the great things we've done, the bad things we've done, and where we are now, and how we can, well, I was going to say how we can keep it the way it is now, but to be honest, the way it is now, it's going a little downhill.
Right.
And so that's kind of a concern of mine. I guess we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I look at, part of it for me is, I look at my parents who worked their tail off, or, they taught, but they also worked second jobs. They worked hard so that we could have a great summer vacation. They wanted to pay their home off early. They each wanted to have their own car. And those were American dreams. And they worked hard. They paid their taxes. They achieved. I think this notion of the American dream, though, now has kind of gone through the roof. And I feel I see a lot of it where people are getting younger and younger, wanting the third car, wanting the boat, wanting the lake house. And the reality is, none of that is a right. It doesn't mean it's okay to want those things and work for those things, right? But I feel like there's an educational component that says you at 30 should not have what your parents didn't have till they were 55. Now, if they are able to make that happen, that's fantastic. But that is the exception rather than the rule. And it is not incumbent upon a parent to say, I've made all this money, I'm now just going to hand it over to the next generation. So there is a work ethic component that I feel we're in danger of losing. And I think, and a greater good component. If I look at the 50s and the 60s, I think about highway transportation system. You think about all that work that went into what the nation needed, right? And it just feels like we don't have that same desire to help the nation that we as a society once did. And I think, some of that is, which is part of why I think patriotism is so important. Like, we have a responsibility to leave the nation better than we found it, not just our individual families, our kids. That's important. And by making your kids better and stronger, the byproduct is that generation feels that importance of carrying that torch. But I feel like we have walked away from that, and that grates at me. That's part of what at the academy, that's something I want us to fix, is people understanding, and that's what I try to teach those students every day, is you need to be grateful that you were born here. You need to be thankful for it, and you have a responsibility because of the freedoms you have, of the finances you have, of the families you have. You have a responsibility to take that and do something with it. God expects you to do something with it. I expect you to do something with it.
I think that's pretty biblical. It sounds like, with the talents,
Right.
and the talents are representative of essentially, what you've been given, and some people are given more, some people are given less, and some people are given a lot and don't multiply it.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask a simple question.
Sure.
Why do you think, because you talk about patriotism, and unfortunately I think patriotism has been connected now to Donald Trump, and that's kind of been like, then if you say the word patriot, I'm like, oh, that person's a Donald Trump person. And apparently that's bad that you voted for him. I don't know. But anyway, why is that so hated? Why do you think this generation is so bent, like harshly pursuing, hating America? Why do you think that is?
So it is a great question. I do feel that there's been a lot of indoctrination, I think, if I look at the collegiate level, and admittedly, so much of what I get is on news, so who knows how much of it is true. But there is so much of this notion of we're going to rip down every statue of anybody that did something that we don't agree with. And people get behind that and they think they're doing the right thing. I think this notion of social justice, right, is what has taken some of that patriotism. And to your point, patriotism almost has become a bad word. Like, I have an American flag flying at my house. So I'm sure in my neighborhood, they know exactly who I voted for in this last election.
Which is so sad that has to, because I think a classical liberal, anyone should be able to be like, I am proud of my country. Exactly. I can have a flag in my yard.
Exactly.
Without people assuming I'm conservative or Republican or whatever.
Right, and that, but it's one of those, it's very clear. If you have got the American flag flying right now, odds are good you voted conservative. You probably voted Republican. If you don't, who knows? But, you can tell on quite a few other flags that, well, we know you definitely voted. You definitely pushed the blue button instead. So, I think there's been this whole notion of, if you are a patriot, it just means that you're an elitist, you're intolerant, nobody else can do anything right, all this. And I honestly think nothing could be further from the truth. And I think that's part of the problem. To me, patriotism, a good patriot, is going to defend this country, is going to defend the laws of the country, the laws that are written in the Constitution, right? They're going to believe in those, and they're going to engage in civil discourse. But first and foremost, the laws are the laws, and that's what we must protect. And that's where I think, if you look at this assault on patriotism, and say, well, if you believe that, you must hate all trans people, you must hate all gay people, you must hate whoever, right? You must hate any illegal immigrant. It's not really about that to me. Patriotism is protecting what we have and shepherding it and helping it grow in the right way. And I think and if you ask what's been the biggest challenge, I think social media is a huge challenge. And I also think the classrooms are a huge challenge. I think especially as you get into high school and you get into college, if the nonstop thing that you are told is America, they colonized places, they destroyed places, they destroyed ways of life, they just took all this material from everybody, they never gave anything back. We have a responsibility, you educated college students have a responsibility to redistribute all that. You tell that to enough people, it may not resonate with everybody, but it's going to resonate with enough that it's going to promulgate over the course of a generation, 2 generations, and they're never hearing the other side of it, that this is also what America did right. We answered the call in World War II. Those kinds of statements, right? And that's where I think the balance has been shifted, which is part of why I'm interested to see what happens with Twitter. To see if once you just start letting people talk without an algorithm, what actually happens? Does the discourse become more civil and come back to the middle? Or do they just continue to get further and further apart? I think it is going to be a fascinating social experiment to find out what happens.
Oh, for sure. I think so. I'm curious on your thoughts. So you were talking about how people that tend to hate the country really don't have any business hating it when they haven't been to other countries to experience it. I kind of feel the same way about people who say this is the best country and haven't been to any others to compare. Yeah. And I've not made my way out of the Americas yet, but Mexico, Haiti, Canada being the most like America and Haiti being the furthest thing away from it.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I can definitely say America's not the worst country. And I don't know, I'm curious on your thoughts where I think part of where the connotation of patriot has gone at this point is people that just blindly follow whatever America does is the right thing to do. At this point in life, I'm not convinced that all the actions taken after 9/11 were the correct actions. Yeah, and considering that we just pulled out of there last year, horrible pullout, but
right.
I think where it comes with patriots is, or maybe the connotation that's been around it is that America's never the villain. And as you get through history, that was one of the interesting things that I remember going through school, whether it was homeschool classes or when I got to the college level, is like I kept learning the same American history over and over again, and each time they'd sprinkle in something that was, some atrocity that happened.
Right.
And it's just like, okay, so this is not the amazing exploration that I heard about Christopher Columbus coming and finding a new land, and it was all roses and unicorns. No, there was a lot of bloody stuff that happened. There were a lot of mistakes that took place. And so I don't know. I've grown up. I think initially I grew up thinking America pretty much did everything right, and then as I found out they definitely made some mistakes and did some things wrong. It's like I want to acknowledge them. I don't want to ignore them.
Fair.
But I've definitely run into people that are still like, responding to Japan with 2 nukes on their civilian population was the right thing to do after Pearl Harbor. I'm like, I don't know that was the right thing to do. Not on civilians.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. When you look at, if I look at the history of that one, I think that was an interesting one because they talked about some of the different conversations they tried to have before the nukes. We also talked about just some of the incendiary bombing campaigns. So that one is an interesting one for me in particular. I think, but if I look at it in total, I want to acknowledge what you said. I think is correct. Has America made mistakes? Absolutely. And I think we would be remiss to say otherwise. I think the difference is you'll know a tree by its fruit. And I think, do we have freedoms that most places do not? Yes. Do we have the opportunity to succeed, whereas most folks do not? Yes. Are any of us afraid that we're going to be jailed because of what we say here? No. And not everybody. Not
for
everybody.
Right now. Just had to put that
exactly,
in there.
Right. Talk to us
Currently.
in February. Right, exactly. This will be, yeah. So, but I think, so I think those are fair statements, right? That I think are true. I think what we also have to say, though, and this is something that tends to bother me, is I find the UN to be a very, very weak organization in many cases. But when a war needs to be fought, 86% of the military that comes in is the American military. And I think what happens is America sometimes looks like the villain, but they're doing the work that has to be done that nobody else can do or nobody else will do. And I see that, I feel time and time again in history. And that's one of those that, so I defend us as a nation because people call us in and they're like, hey, we're going to need you to save us and deliver us. Just make sure no civilians get harmed in the process, kind of thing. And I just, and I'm painting with a very broad brush there, but I say that to say sometimes America can be a broadsword versus a scalpel for sure, right? And when that happens, there is going to be collateral damage. But I also have to think, if you look at it has been a stalwart of freedom. And if you look at all the people that are still trying to pour into this country illegally, clearly there is still something here that is drawing people to it, right? I mean, you don't see a ton of people begging to get into Venezuela, right? And so, it's one of those and I think we have to acknowledge some of those things. So have we made mistakes? Yes. Sometimes it's just simply making that statement. Hey, we should not have done that. But there's nothing we can do about it now. Mm-hmm. We've got to be smarter. We've got to learn from it. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right? I mean, it's that simple. And we're seeing some of that now, I think. But I that's one of those that I think there are, and opinions will always vary, right? Especially for people who think we should never go to war. I'm one of those who thinks diplomacy can work up to a point, but at some point you're going to have to stand and fight.
Yeah, I would agree.
And America has answered that call when other people wouldn't. And some of the people that point that finger and say, well, America is bad, are the people who didn't answer the call or whom we bailed out in some cases. So I think that is the lens I have on it. So I take it with a grain of salt in some cases.
I think there's something, because I was listening to both of you guys, and there's something that kind of stuck out to me is that there is a thing where we do kind of paint with that really broad brush. But if you look closely at, how even the Constitution came together, right? There was a lot of different stuff that was happening. There was a lot of riots, a lot of different things going on. Washington owned slaves, but he tried to kind of get rid of them, but because of his estate with his wife, he couldn't. It's very, very, very complicated stuff. And then we also have to remember, too, when we say, okay, America did this, okay, which president? Right. What Senate body? What House? Because think about this. We could look back in history at Kabul, at what happened, and be like, America made a mistake. And we'd all go, oh, heck yeah, we made a mistake. But most Americans in this moment, in this present day, say, no, Joe Biden made a big, big mistake. But people could look back at this 50 years from now and say, well, America did that horrible thing, so that makes America bad. It's like, it made that body really bad. Right. And so America, again, when you paint America with a super broad brush, I agree with Connor's point that, yeah, America's done some really bad things. But we also have to remember there's a ton of complexities that go into, when it comes to war, right? You would hope that a civilian never gets hurt. Like, that would be the idealistic, euphoric hope that we would have. Yeah. And again, I'm not going to talk specifically about the nukes in Japan because I don't know enough, so I can't speak to it. But in any situation where a civilian gets hurt, we have to look at the situation of what happened, and that's really important. And I also do with Connor's point about patriotism, and I'm with you with it. Where I love my country. I tell people this. I'm half Asian. I'm half Caucasian, but I consider myself American always first. I don't really care as much about my race. Yeah. I'm a believer first, and then in regards to my citizenship in this earth, I'm American. Right. I kind of lost my train of thought, to be perfectly honest. But again, okay, patriotism. I do think that there are some people that can be blind to the details in regards to patriotism, where I think I heard a statement that all the founding fathers, and this was from someone that was in the House, who's well known, who said, all the founding fathers knew that they were saved by the blood of Christ. And I said, no. Yeah, I mean, they were deists, and they clearly,
that might be your Christian nationalism right there.
But I think it's ignorance. I think it's honestly, I don't think it's willful Christian nationalism. It's just, I think it's ignorance. It's like, okay, they were deists, and that's why I always say, the founding fathers, regardless of their philosophical and religious beliefs, they did hold Judeo-Christian values, even in the imperfections of their time, which was slavery, is obviously a contentious point, and that was a contentious point within the Constitution as well. Yeah. So just kind of speaking to both, because I think there's somewhere where it kind of meets in the middle when it comes to, that's what Kai said earlier about conservatives knowing their history too, so they don't paint a broad brush. It's like, wait a minute, that's not true. you want to be able, you can speak as accurately as you possibly can.
Yeah, no, and which I think, to me, I think, and I would say two things there. I think it absolutely is important. You had some founding fathers who were pastors who absolutely were Christians. You had others who were deists by and large. And I think that is an important distinction to make. But I think you have said it well when you've said, look, the reality is it was founded on Judeo-Christian values. Now, when we get into the minutia of it and we start talking about some of those other aspects of slavery being one of them, we certainly shouldn't run from it. What I want to make sure when we're having conversations about the framework of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the history of this country, what it's founded on, it's similar to the America versus the president argument. You have to look at the body of work and say, did they land at the right spot? And I think our founding fathers did, right? I think what they were asked to do was very, very difficult, and I think somehow they found a way to land that plane, which I think is truly amazing. So, and I think that's the same thing for me. If I think about the discussions today, and this is where I think it gets tough, because in every topic, some people are so well read on one side of it, but not the other.
They don't look at the other
follow
side.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna everything Shapiro says, I'm gonna watch. Everything Jordan Peterson says, I'm gonna watch.
You've read my mind.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
I'm never gonna listen to anything else. Right.
Right.
And those are two brilliant people. Don't get me wrong. They're very intelligent, but
They're not always right.
they're not always right.
No.
And because nobody is, right? And what I think we're finding is people will hitch onto an article they read in the New England Journal of Medicine or the Norwegian Engineering Times or whatever it is, right? And they're like, well, this guy said this, so it has to be right. And I'm like, maybe. And maybe it is for that case. But that's where we've got to be able to talk about, I've got to be able to look around. The economy is a great one, right? People arguing the economy's up, the economy's down. Some people are like, oh, it's stronger than it's ever been. We're in recession, we're not in recession. Look around. You tell me.
Use your eyeballs.
Where are we, right? And it's one of those, and it may be different for different folks, but until we're having that conversation, just truly, like, where are we? Do you really believe what you're espousing based on what you see? I think we're going to struggle. And social media is a problem there, right? Because, everybody's the 30-second blurbs kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
If people are using it to be like, okay, I'm going to fact check that. Okay, that's interesting. Let me learn more. Great. But if they're just taking it, putting that handle and broadcasting it, we're exacerbating the problem in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's usually where that ends up.
And that's usually where it ends up. Yep.
Yeah, I think the short form media has really lowered people's attention spans.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting because I think I brought up the Vine platform before. That one was like so short that it forced an amount of creativity that you could only get in like 6 seconds for the video.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, you had 6 seconds was the max. So it's like you had 6 seconds to tell a story or do something that would catch people's attention, and you had to have a conclusion.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to deal with the part 1, part 2, part 3 type stuff. But then it was like, it was short enough that there's only so much ridiculousness you could get into it. And now with the 30 and 60 second clips that are out there, they can put more information. But I don't know. It's like, I feel like once it was really, really short, it forced an amount of creativity.
Yeah.
And there was something different there. But now they've hit this sweet spot of just, and I'm guilty of it too. You can just sit there and just scroll and just go through short after short after short. And it really gets people stuck on it.
It's at the academy, we have a low tech, no tech policy. Mm-hmm. So you can do some computer work really starting in about 4th grade. You may touch it on occasion in 3rd, but we are trying to really keep people off screens as much as possible. Because I do think, to your point, what I am seeing, and it's one of the biggest differences, I think, in the generation I grew up in. I sound like an old man.
Can we ask you how old you are?
I will be 45 next week. So 45.
No way.
Yes.
Okay, you actually don't look that old, in my opinion.
Thanks.
Yep, no.
Yeah. But it's one of those that I find attention span has radically diminished over the last 10, 12 years.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of those that if you can't keep kid constantly laughing or have their attention, they're going to zone out, and that's something we do have to improve upon in short order to be able to pour into people more, educate them more. That's something we've got to claw back.
That's something that actually I'm curious about how you guys handle a classroom, because America's been a pretty one-dimensional. I don't know. Yeah, everything from the classroom to churches to just anything where there's an audience or there's something to be taught. It's kind of the same formula. You've got a speaker and you've got a bunch of listeners, and the listeners sit, take notes quietly, listen. And if you look at videos of schools around the world and other education centers, they're not like that.
No.
They're very interactive. There's kids getting up and down. They're helping each other. Right. There's group projects and stuff. So I'm curious if you guys have changed the standard formula in America.
Yeah, we definitely operate in a different paradigm. We come together as a group in the morning, and there'll be some interaction there. One of the kids always comes up and will lead the pledge for us, so they're always going to be on the platform. And the way we work, it's similar to a church service. You've got your platform that we speak from, and you're only on the platform if you're invited, but you're on the platform for a reason. We call it the platform because you have influence now, so use it, speak appropriately. But so with chapel as a good example, so we do our chapel lesson once a week. The kids are all active participants, so they will be characters in the story. And so all of them are they could be Midianites one week, they could be Israelites one week, right? We could have, Rehoboam's follow. You guys are the advisors. So we do, my view is you got to be an active part of it. Right? Otherwise, one, you're going to learn it better. Two, you feel involved. Three, you get experience in front of other people, which I think is so important. And it's one of those, let's start socializing folks earlier. But we work hard to introduce the kids speaking as much as possible. So every time there's a big announcement, I like our student government sharing that with the kids.
Right.
So, my goal is they do that. We definitely do group projects. When we do our STEM days, we break it down so that the whole school, we put them into separate groups. So instead of all of fifth grade goes with fourth grade, it's going to be, there's a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, fourth grader. So they're together,
That's very important.
helping each other.
Yeah, no, that's a big deal.
Recess and lunch, everybody's together. If you look at some of our other specials, we try to bring everybody together because I want the bigs, as I call them, especially my fourth and fifth graders. I want them to feel the mantle of being the responsible adults in the room kind of thing. And
breeding leadership.
Exactly, right, at an early age. And it's been exciting to watch that happen. Really, that development I've seen pretty sizable improvement over the first 2 months, and it's been good to see. There's a confidence factor that's growing, but also the socialization. Some of those kids will take the K4s and they'll walk them, and they'll be playing and they'll do the Frisbee and everything. So that's the stuff that I'm so thrilled about because it gets lost a lot of time in a bigger setting, whereas we have that opportunity to foster that.
I think it gets lost in the public schools as well, that really just segregate everything by grade and age. The co-op that I was a part of, which was only a 1 day a week co-op, and it wasn't really like they were teaching you things. We just had extracurricular classes, basically. They always grouped 2 grades together. So you had first and second graders, third and fourth, fifth and sixth, all the way up. I think high school, it was like all grades, though. Yeah. But I always found, and it was interesting because our co-op was heavily attended by the people that went to the same church. Yeah. And on Sundays or anytime around like youth group or any bigger events, it was really obvious to me that the homeschoolers interacted much better with anybody younger than them or older than them. Yep. And the public schoolers would tend to still stick in their grades with the friends that they knew, and they didn't interact as much with everybody else. Now, they would interact with those of us who were their same age or grade. Right. But when it came to like younger kids, they had a much harder time with it.
Yep. No, I think that's well said, and that's one of the things I feel like conflict resolution has been a lost art for a long time, and that's one of the other things that has been fun to watch. Is you've seen it, right? Kids playing football together, kids playing kickball together. There's just a lot of screaming and shouting, and so my motto has always been, look, you guys need to fix this before I get over there. Mm-hmm. One, because there won't always be an adult to fix things for you. But more importantly, the sooner you learn how to do this successfully, right, navigate these waters, the better you're going to be at conflict resolution when it really matters, not when the score is 3-2 in a kickball game, but when it actually, like, okay, what are we going to do here? So that's been an interesting one to watch, but it's been great to see them start to learn and realize that, okay, we need to figure this out on our own. And you're starting to see some of the creativity associated with this, like, okay, how about we do it this way? So I feel conflict resolution, critical thinking, attention span. These are three things we're pretty light on right now. And I think, similarly, we've talked a lot about social and people's opinions about things. I just don't think people have put a critical eye on things in general, on topics, on issues in a long time. You basically made the decision, I don't like Donald Trump, so I'm never going to vote Republican, can't do it. I don't like Joe Biden, I'm never going to vote Democrat, can't do it. Mm-hmm. Can't even look at their policies. Whatever they say must be wrong. Yep. Must be wrong. And obviously I have opinions on all that, but I think the short answer is we have to be able to talk about it at a different level than we are, or not talk about it at all, which is what I actually think is happening more often than not, right? Like one side will say it, we'll post it, the other side will say something and post it, but nobody's just sitting down over a cup of coffee saying, we don't agree on anything, but let's find something we do agree on and see if we can make a better road forward.
I think we've lost the ability to just sit down and have conversation. I kind of talk. I've kind of dreamed about the days where men would just go into like a pub or meet together in a room on an evening or something and discuss different ideas with the one they had. Sadly, say they had the intelligence and the knowledge to have those conversations. Right. So that's an important variable. But to be able to sit down and discuss things that they disagreed on, those conversations are much more fun. Yeah. And when you're so volatile towards each other and you're so cruel and you make so many assumptions, those conversations aren't fun anymore. They're just annoying and they're life draining. And so the three things that you talked about are very, very important. And I am a big, big person in regards to critical thinking. I just spend so much time, I will look, we kind of mentioned Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson. I like those people. It seems like you like them too. I know you with Ben Shapiro, but you like Jordan Peterson pretty well. But think of someone that you like and you think that they say a lot of good stuff. The thing I've learned, I'm like, okay, and this is the important thing, and I kind of want to bring in, because we talked a lot about America, but I want to bring this in. I say, okay, what does God's word say? What objective truth do I need to measure this statement with? Because Jordan Peterson's not a Christian.
Right.
He's not a Christian. Now you have to think more critically with Jordan Peterson because his language and his intelligence is so high. Right. And so it's a good exercise. If you're really wanting to critically think, Jordan Peterson's a great person for it. Ben Shapiro, I think, is also a good person for it because he's also very, very smart and talks very, very fast.
Yes, he does. Yes.
But that's the thing that I noticed that people just don't have. They just can't critically think. I was at an event, and I think Freedom House, they were a part of it, where Charlie Kirk went on to a campus here in Charlotte.
Oh yeah.
And so they have plenty of conservatives come up to do this Q&A, but they also have liberals that come up, which I'm glad that they've come, by the way. Really happy that they've come. And so they get up there. And I'm not even kidding, there are some smart liberals out there, very smart liberals. But these ones, I tell you what, and this not to be mean, they could not articulate their own argument. Right. But they had enough boldness to think that they could articulate it. Because whether you like Charlie Kirk or not, he's definitely a very smart and well-read man.
He is.
So if you go up against any smart, well-read person, you'd be like, okay, I need to know my stuff, right? I really got to make sure I've thought this through. But they get up there and they got nothing.
Right.
Literally nothing.
Right.
And they can't even, it's because they haven't critically thought it through, so they cannot correctly articulate their own points. And that's a major issue. And so if you have one side that cannot articulate, how are you going to have a good discussion with someone if there is no ability to articulate in an intelligent and civil manner?
Yeah, and I think if you look at it's election season, right? It's debate season, and I don't watch debates. I'll be honest and say I watch as little TV other than football as possible.
There you go. There you go.
But I think how much better served would we be if it was, here is my platform, here is what I want to do, am going to do. And I think so much of it is just these candidates are shouting at each other now. They've got 2-minute responses. They don't have a chance to go deep on things. I just feel it would be so much more useful if you could say, I'm going to take 15 minutes and I'm going to articulate, this is my plan for the economics that I am accountable for.
That used to be, that's how I learned to debate.
Which in my mind, that's meaningful. You have a captive audience, right? Because when it becomes a personality contest, right? The reality is, and Donald Trump's a great example. When it becomes a personality contest, half the people are going to love every zinger he comes up with. Mm-hmm. Half the people are going to hate everything he says, right?
Sure.
Half the people aren't going to care if it's accurate or not. Half the people are going to tear into every single word that he said. Joe Biden's no different. Almost any candidate right in our current state is no different. And, that's what if I want somebody that can clearly articulate, here's the why. Here's what I want you to measure me against, right? Yeah. But if you don't, this is what I'm going to do when I get here. And if you don't like this, then you need to vote for the other guy. If you don't like what the other guy's doing either, then you still have a responsibility to vote. You just have to figure out which one of us you think you can live with for the next 2 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like because I have so many conversations, be like, well, I'm just not voting because my vote's not going to count. Your vote does count. My view on it is you voted whether you went to the polls or not, right? And it's one of those that you have absolutely made a statement because, again, there are some, you mentioned testing it in biblical principles. I think as a Christian especially, I would tell you, you must vote because God, if you didn't vote, then God considers you as voted as far as I'm concerned, and he knows the way you voted kind of thing. And I think if if that's not your belief system, I still would argue you have got to be able to vote or you lose your right to complain about anything until the next election cycle comes back around.
Yep, I would agree with that.
I agree too.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about how people just are either all for Donald Trump or not at all for Donald Trump. And going back to your comments on critical thinking is that people, it's odd. If you can criticize somebody, then you must be against them. Is kind of where they've fallen. Right. Is that if you're going to follow somebody, you don't criticize them. Whether it's the president, it's your pastor, it's your teacher, it's your governor, like whatever it is, or a movie star, you have to be all in on them. I'm like, no, you don't. Yeah. You can look at stuff that Trump does, and I'm happy to tell you the things that he's done wrong and the things he did good. And Joe Biden's list is a lot heavier on the wrong side than it is on the good side, but they all have those positive and negatives. And it just seems like the country's gotten to a point where they cannot criticize leadership, figureheads, famous people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. And, it's one of those that I love that statement that you're voting for a platform, not a person, which I do think fundamentally that's something else we've got to get back to, right? Is what does the party believe, and what does the party say? These are our operating principles. These are our marching orders, and then how closely are the candidates following that? And there can be nuances, admittedly, but I think if Trump continues to be such a polarizing figure. That's the understatement of the year, probably, right? But but it's one of those that what I always tell folks is, can we take a step back, forget that man, right? Let's look at his 4 years. Do you feel your life was better or worse during those 4 years? Mm-hmm. However you feel about Joe Biden, take a step back, look at the last 2 years, give or take. Do you feel your life is better or worse? And then you can start applying it. Then say, okay, now how many years have you walked the earth? Okay, now look when so-and-so was in charge and so-and-so was in charge, right? And in my mind, you see there are patterns of evidence there that you have to account for. And so but to me, that is critical thinking. To me, you've got to be able to step away from the person and say, let's look at the policies that were enacted, and let's look at what they have meant, the fruit that they have grown, that they have shown. And I think that's where we're getting so tripped around the axle. Well, there are plenty of spots. Don't get me wrong. I think I think it's going to be interesting if we look at the next 2 years. I think it is going to be very fascinating. I mean, we'll see, is there really going to be a red wave? Is it a red tsunami? Is it a red puddle? Who knows what it's going to be, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think regardless, people need to use some critical thinking and temper their expectations. Because even if something happens and Republicans take over both houses of Congress, how many laws are actually going to get passed if they get vetoed at the federal level?
Yeah, it's just going to be a stalemate for a couple of years.
So at that point, so then I hope people are looking with a critical lens, saying the majority of the American people voted for these policies, which one man at that point would have blocked. Mm-hmm. So, wow, these are the things we want, and we had to wait 2 years on them. Now we have an opportunity to put those policies in place.
Sure. Yeah.
Now the question is, who's going to be the person that runs on the other side? And I think that is
on both sides at this point, because I'm sorry, Biden won't make it. I'm just going to put it out there.
I don't think he will be the guy on the side for the. I don't think he'll be.
Do some 2024.
Right, exactly. Right. I mean, it could be right.
I don't know. I don't know.
So I think it's one of those that to me is another one of those. What's the long game going to be? Because the next 2 years, I think, will be very bumpy, irrespective of how November plays out. I think some people think November is going to happen and there's going to be this dramatic change. And I don't see that happening. Yeah. But that's where we as a populace have got to really think long and hard and say, okay, now we've learned a lot. So let's make smart choices over the next 8 to 16 years, admittedly, you talk about generations change. I mean, that's another generation that comes up at that point. But I think that's the lens that we've got to have on it, and that's that critical thinking with that broader perspective, which requires the ability to focus for longer periods of time. That's why we've got to gain that back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you talked about the next generation rising up, and that's a big part. That's why education is so important, is like you're training your next generation. That's why there are some people that are saying that Gen Z is gonna kind of revert back. That's gonna become better because they see the effects of what's happened with millennials. I'm not 100% on board because I think the stuff that we've done with transgender ideology has been so damaging, not just on an ideological level, but on a literal physical level for the children and the parents that have been bullied or have genuinely believed that this is the right thing to do by greedy medical professionals. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I was going to say something else. Yes, that's what I was going to say. I have too many thoughts. It's too much. I have too many. Connor knows this. He's like, it's fine, Jordan. Just keep talking. It's okay. But also in regards to looking at these different candidates, I tell people too, I'm like, remember, don't just look at Donald Trump. Look at who's in his administration. Yep. That's really important, because I guarantee you Trump's not he's not making all of those policies on his own. I think he's a good showman. He's a good businessman. Do I think he's the smartest man on the planet? I do not. No. I don't. But with the people that he was strategic enough to put good people in his administration who did that work, which is really important. But you also talked about something else that's important. You've said so many great things, Sam. Thank you for.
I wrote them all down.
Yeah, you were dreaming about them.
That's right. Yeah.
But the idea of looking more long term, where I think that this is an issue that both sides have, because you pointed it out, where it's like, once we get past 2024, there's this big red wave, and everything's going to be magical and everything's going to be great. that's not true. It's just not going to happen. We have to look even past 2024. Right. We have to, like, that's the thing that I feel like China's very good at doing, although they've made a mistake with their population control, but they look like hundreds of years into the future. Americans, we look literally 2 years.
Right.
4 years. Like that is a grain of sand in the grand scheme of time. Yeah. We're really bad at it. And so I think there could be some good things that come out of this economic situation that we've had. And also I think national security right now, I think is becoming an issue for us that I think Americans are starting to think about more. But I think with this economic thing, they're like, oh, maybe we should think a little bit more ahead. Maybe we shouldn't base our voting just simply on our emotions regarding a candidate.
Right.
It's honestly, genuinely one of the most, and I mean this in sincerity, one of the most foolish things you can do is even base your voting on your emotions, pure emotions.
They are poor leaders.
Yes,
Poor leaders.
More emotions. Now, you can have facts that back up your feelings regarding certain things. Sure. But if you make feelings, your feelings your basis for everything you do, you're going to end up in a world of hurt, and the reality is going to sink in, and then your feelings are going to get way more hurt.
Well, no, absolutely. And I think, for me, the national power grid is a big one. Infrastructure in general. It was one of those when the current administration was kicking around the idea of infrastructure. But listen, there's a lot that absolutely needs to happen, right? I mean, it is aging, it is antiquated, but it's a tough pill to swallow, right? Because it is tons and tons of money. My question is, who is going to be that person who's going to stand there and say, this isn't going to be popular, but we got to rebuild it, and we have 2 options. Either I'm going to raise taxes or I'm going to slash programs, one or the other.
I say we slash the temporary programs that have been running and have become permanent.
Hey, listen, I absolutely agree, right? To me, that, it's one of those, you say that, votes go out the window. But who is the person who is going to stand in the gap? And I think that's part of why when I talk about term limits, getting rid of pensions, things like that, that's why. It was never meant to be a lifestyle. It was never meant to be a job. Government, first and foremost, in my mind, is a burden. And if you sign up to do it, it's going to cost you something. It's going to hurt. There are going to be late nights, but you're doing it because you feel it's the right thing. And the higher the office, the greater that sacrifice ultimately has to be. And I just feel like we've gotten away from so much of that now. Everybody leaves office worth more than they came in. And that's not okay, in my opinion. It's one of those that, especially for folks who, quite frankly, I feel have done nothing in many cases, right? They've been yes men, yes women. And so that's what I want to get back to the people. And, we've got some local candidates I've had the privilege of talking to, and they've been, they've been fantastic just in terms of, hey, this is, I was comfortable. I was a businessman. I was a professional, but I feel called to do this. I think we've got to make this happen. And that's what I want to see us get back to, is more people who say, I'm going to get off the couch, get off the boat because I'm going to have to, and push forward on this. So that's something I want to see us get back to, that notion of government as a burden.
Yeah. No, I think because we ended up talking to Tyler Lee as well. And I was very refreshed by our conversation, where it was just very different of he's like, listen, I don't plan on being here for, forever.
He's great.
I'm really just here to try to help clean things up and, hoping that, and I think that's a great thing to do. It's very, very refreshing and very honest. And I think, to your point, there's a lot of people that they leave office and, they're worth more. Yeah. And I do think about specifically Tyler Lee of what he's given up.
Yeah.
And when I heard of some of the stuff he did, I'm like, oh wow. So you're really gonna sacrifice for this then.
And he is. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we need to see is more sacrificial leadership, and you are working for us. You represent us.
Exactly.
And what Tyler, when we talked to him, we're like, what you're saying, every candidate I've talked to is like, this is common sense. This makes sense to me.
Right.
No drag queens with our children.
Right.
Shouldn't
really be a conversation, really, right?
It shouldn't be a conversation. And the fact that it has to be, and it brings back to it, kind of circling back a little bit, not like Jen Psaki. I'll actually talk about it. Connor, what you looking for? Okay, so you're gonna want to turn that backpack up, and then that front pouch, you should see some in there. Yeah, there you go. Wonderful. It's all right. It happens. So something must have gone wrong there, but that's fine. So anyway, we'll keep talking while he's working that out. But I was doing a bit more research on George Washington and his involvement in the Constitution. And there was an understanding that, for this convention, that it would not be successful without George Washington, because there was an unspoken idea that he was going to come in and be the first president. That was really their hope and their strong desire. And because they knew George Washington's character. Yep. It took him a lot to even get there to come to the convention. Yep. And so he was like, I really don't want to, but he kind of saw the need for it. And so he stepped up. And so to a certain extent, they kind of worked the Constitution around a certain idea, a certain character of a person. And so you look at the people we have now, they don't fit like George Washington had his flaws. Yes, sure, okay, yes, right. Okay, yes, okay. Carry on though. Let's just look at this though. None of the politicians, not none, that's not true. There's a lot of politicians now that don't have that character. I agree. They don't have it. And so the Constitution doesn't fit that bill for the people that we've created. Right.
Well, and I think, that's, to me, that's so well said. Again, it's part of that notion of, I remember I was walking the streets of London once, and there was a sign a window sign at one of the stores. It was like, too many rules, too few examples. And it's always resonated with me, because I feel like fundamentally that's what government needs to be, is a few rules, and good people follow those rules and teach other people this is how you behave in those rules, right? And if that makes things so much simpler, right? And I think, so again, Washington to me is a great example, right? This is a guy who, this is what we're going to do because it has to get done, so I'm going to do it, and then I'm out, right? Yeah. And that's what we need more of, is people who are willing to say that's what we're going to do. Like, this is what I believe. I believe that drag queens should not be dancing in front of kids on taxpayer-funded dollars, and we need to codify that. Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm a dad.
Sad we even have to codify.
Right. I'm a dad of two girls, and so obviously I have a tremendous amount of passion on boys and girls sports. Again, I can't believe I'm even saying that they shouldn't be there, because they have boy sports that they could go play in. So that's where there's a lot of that righteous anger again. Like, it's one of those that I can't believe it's even a thing, but not only is it a thing, like, we need to make sure that girls are protected to play girls sports, to be able to go into girls' locker rooms. It's those kinds of things. And that's one of those, fundamentally, when people start talking about Trump, people start talking about whoever, I'm like, listen, I get that you may not like the guy. I get that you may not like a lot of conservative or Republican politicians, but ask yourself, as a female, as a parent, is that really what you want? Do you really want boys in that locker room? Do you really want boys spiking about 70 miles an hour, concussing girls in volleyball games? Like, where does it end except the death of women's sports? And that's just not okay to me.
It's deeper than just women's sports. Is. It's the erasure of women. I wrote a scathing article regarding this Ulta Beauty podcast with Dylan Mulvaney, a man, and another man who claims to be gender fluid, and it is disgusting and it is insulting. And even like third wave feminists are getting upset about it too, and that shows you. It's like, and I've been trying to say for years that transgenderism is the direct enemy of modern feminism, and that you cannot hold both beliefs simultaneously. It's not possible. Yeah. Like, you can't be logically consistent in that matter.
But I think that is fundamentally, when you point it back to the Bible, if you don't have an objective, actual truth, everybody is just going to live their truth, and that for me is part of why the Word of God is so important, because there are ground rules that it is setting it out. And that is one of those things that obviously I teach in my family. We teach at the academy. That's something that we teach at our church. That's something that I feel very strongly about, because otherwise you get into these kinds of arguments where there's this, is transgender and gender fluid, whatever that even means, honestly. But, it's one of those that it just keeps spiraling out of control until people are trying to defend all these same beliefs simultaneously. And I'm like, well, that doesn't actually work. It all just collapses under the weight of its own lunacy.
That's the thing. Relative truth has to collide with reality. That's the thing
at some point.
What the Lord has created is that, you might believe that men can be women and women can be men. Reality, unfortunately, and the makeup of society does not align with
Correct.
that. And so that's why the argument of you can do it in your own home but don't do it outside the home. I know a lot of conservatives will make that argument. I don't think it's a good one.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good long-term argument, because you're, like you said, like it's gonna come into women's sports. For you have men that are impersonating women impersonating men. It's also very offensive to men for women to be like, oh, I'm a man, and then but transgender men don't have to go sign up for the draft. Like, wait a minute, you're a man,
right? Right.
That doesn't
exactly.
It shouldn't. You should have to do it.
Yeah, things should just be. Again, I'm a simple guy, so things should just be simpler than they are. And then I think, but that's we have a responsibility, I think, too, as society, as people. We've got to call out insanity when we see it. And too long, we've just allowed this to happen, and the temperature has just slowly risen. And now suddenly, when you make a statement like, hey, there are just two genders, you get labeled. I mean, I've been labeled everything, right? I'm a bigot. I'm a
Which
misogynist.
is insanity.
This is where the Christian nationalist comes back in. Like, well, if you really think that there are just two genders, you're crazy. So that's one of those, like, I don't know how we got here, but we cannot, as a nation, we can't continue on this path. Mm-hmm. So much of it is, how do we get back to having things we agree on, so that we as a nation can grow? Because right now, the concern I have is that there are almost two nations living under the same banner.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And a house divided amongst itself is not going to stand. I mean, we're fine, but this is not a tenable position to maintain forever, especially when you've got other countries. China is a great example, that they are absolutely marching in lockstep. I'm sure not all of them want to be, but they are. And you can't just dismiss that, right? So when you talk about national security, it's a great one, right? There are some people that are determined to be the apex predator, and we have a responsibility to protect ourselves, and we're doing a very poor job of it right now. Yeah.
No, I don't think you're wrong about that. You asked the question, how do we get back, mm-hmm. and that's the real question. And we've kind of alluded to it. Objective truth, is important. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we've both talked about on the podcast, multiple times, is that, we don't have an objective truth, and we have like all these different variables, right? Okay, we have transgenderism, we have abortion, we have modern feminism, we have, the economy, which is making it harder for a single income to live. All these small things break down the nuclear family to an extent where, like, it dissipates. You can't have two men can't raise a child the same way that a man and a woman who are in a loving, committed marriage can.
That's right.
It's just not as possible. And I'd like to, get both of your thoughts on this of what is it practically gonna take to get us back? That's the question.
You won't like my answer because I'm going to be more on the pessimistic side of things, is that America doesn't exist in Revelation as far as anybody has ever been able to decipher that book. So for me, the end result is, whether it be in 100 years or 1,000 years, America's not going to be here. So to me, there's not really a saving it. And that's kind of the deal with the world as well. Is it, as far as the Christian beliefs goes, that it's eventually going to turn itself over to sin and chaos and anti-God. Along the way, our job is to bring as many people to Christ and save as many people as possible. So I guess, and my answer is, I don't know how far back we can get it before it just kind of takes a dive off a cliff.
Yeah, I think so. I think you nailed a lot of it there. The answer to me is the mobilized church is the hope of the world. So first and foremost, we have a responsibility to teach people and point them to Christ. And I think as you do that, you see change break, and some people are freed, and you start to see the reformation of that nuclear family. Now, I think 2 points for you. The Revelation said it well, right? If you look at the letters to the 7 churches, right, you are watching, this is not supposed to, I'm not going into my doom and gloom here, but we are living in the last days. How much time is left? That I don't know, admittedly. But if you look at the letters, particularly to the church of Laodicea, what you're seeing so much is you are seeing churches that more and more just look like the world. Mm-hmm. So they are reinforcing all those things you espouse. They're reinforcing those, right? The churches that say, hey, that's not okay, those are getting fewer and fewer. I heard a stat that there were 360,000 churches before the pandemic. There are 240,000 now nationwide. So if you look at that, when you ask the question, what's it going to take? I don't know that we ever get back to where the nuclear family was, but I do know that we can save many, many souls in that window. And that's what we have to focus on, because at the end of the day, many will turn away. Many will grow. Many are being deceived. This is an, oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you moment. You know, there are so many people who are believing the lie that you can be whoever you want to be. God's going to love you no matter what. God does love you no matter what. But I love my kids and I still discipline them, right? It's, you know, and I think that is the truth that people have walked away from, or this whole notion that Jesus loves you exactly the way you are. He does, but he loves you enough that he's not going to let you stay there, right? So, I mean, he's got righteous anger. He flipped over tables. I mean, so I think we've got to focus on communicating the truth, answering the Great Commission, telling people the truth, even though not all of them are going to like it. Plenty will not embrace it, but that does not mean that we stop. And I think we'll see it play out where more and more folks, I think, will start to turn away. But we will see the church grow in many pockets where people have been lukewarm, and I think that's where we see us taking back some ground for the kingdom.
Kind of wonder if all those churches that disappeared during the pandemic were some of the lukewarm churches.
Absolutely.
Because the amount of churches that immediately just bent the knee to the government when they told them you can't have services was incredible and really telltaling of the American church compared to the underground church in China,
right,
or any other country where it's just not allowed.
Right.
It's like, okay, so your government says you can't have it on Sundays anymore because there's COVID out there that they really have no control over stopping, and would still allow other events to happen.
Right.
You could still go to strip clubs. You could still find your way out to eat. There were still shows. Like, they still had people congregating, not to mention all the protests,
right,
and celebratory drinks that they all had in the streets, sharing together with strangers. Like, all of that stuff happened, and you were just bent the knee and went with it. So I think less churches might be a good thing, because it might refine the quality of,
I think it's fair,
of the people more. But I mean, it's like it's kind of a doom and gloom prophecy a little bit, but at the same time, there's still an inherent need to protect people, whether they share the beliefs or not. So I think that a lot of stuff we're talking on the podcast, a lot of the new ideologies we see hurting people, and we don't want them to hurt people. So that fight's still going to commence.
Absolutely.
Even if I know that the physical world is eventually a loss, but we're looking for something that's beyond the physical. It's going to be the spiritual world, the afterlife,
right?
Is what we're fighting for in the long term.
That's right.
Yeah, and honestly, I agree with that. I know you said I wasn't gonna like your answer. No, I agree.
Most people don't like that answer. There's like,
Well,
how do we get that word? I'm like, you're not. It's going downhill. You can only count down on the days since Christ died.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that is, I think, one area where I think sometimes Christian Republicans can go a little far is where they're like, we're going to save America. And that's kind of their main goal, and that's their mission. And listen, I'm all about, like Connor said, like that's why we have this podcast. That's why I want to talk to people. We know these ideologies are dangerous. And when they come after the kids, like that's when I get mad, where I'm like, and you have girls, I don't have any kids yet, but I'm like, I'm already at it. I'm already on it.
Yeah.
Like I can't stand it. It bothers me. It should bother any single person that wants to bring children into this world. And so obviously this stuff bothers me. And obviously my goal is like, can we have these conversations and can it eventually lead to a gospel conversation? And so we have a lot of Christian Republicans like, gotta save America. And it's like, let's do what we can, right? Absolutely. Let's do what we can. But let's also make sure that we are trying to win those souls back for the Lord, because we know, and I think America is going to go downhill. I do. And I'm sorry for anyone who's like, no, we can save it. You know, in the end days, we know that's probably something that's going to happen. The question is, who are we going to take with us to heaven? That's the real question. And so for, Republicans that are not Christians, who aren't believers, for me, that should be hopefully a gospel opportunity for us when we end up getting to talk to them. Be like, do you really think? I think we need more than legislator here. There's something more in our hearts that we need.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the question about America and America's future, that it's an interesting one because, again, I was a history major in college, and, one of the things you study, you look at century theories, half-century theories, and nobody stays on top forever, right, admittedly. And really what you find almost invariably is once they just give themselves over to voting themselves whatever they want, life is good, they've secured themselves, they stop growing as an empire, they stop working on what made them successful. That's the second that you start to watch that devolution there.
And so we're kind of following that pattern.
Exactly. And I think we would be kidding ourselves to say that we weren't. And it's less about military at this point and more about technology and some of those things. But still, I think we're absolutely seeing it. When your military training is focusing on pronouns instead of how to field strip an M16, then you've made some mistakes.
Sure,
right.
Yeah, that feels common sense to me.
Right. So it's some of those, like, again, things you should never have to say that we're having this conversation, and I'm sure some people hear that and be like, well, those pronouns are important. They're not. So it's one of those that that's where, if you look at it, we're going down that exact same path, and you can stop the decline, but you can't always just arrest it and reverse it. And I think it doesn't mean America would not always be a great, amazing place until the end of days, whenever that may be. But what it does mean is, we are not operating with the same focus, discipline, leadership, you name it, and that all leaks down. And inherently, it has to, and that's what happens. And that's what we're seeing in the local church. Well, in the church too, not just the local, but where the belief system that we held so dear is being compromised in a lot of cases, and we're seeing the adverse effects of that, and it's trickling into all aspects of society because the world should be peripheral to the church, not vice versa, and that's so much of what we're seeing. And I think it absolutely is having an impact. And as you say, as you see these Barna studies where it says, fewer and fewer people are going to church, fewer and fewer people identify as Christian, more and more people identify as, transgender, whatever. That is absolutely going in the wrong direction of what you need to maintain the firm foundation that can grow and have a stable society that flourishes. And so that's something that we have to be on guard against. And sitting in the chair I sit in, I know it comes with some attacks. It comes with people that disagree with that, but I have a responsibility to speak the truth, just as we all have a responsibility to see the truth, especially as we see it. And so we can't apologize for that.
No, you're right. And I think We've already been watching kind of the middle ground in the church fall. I've had the belief that there's a lot of people in churches who are not believers.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I cannot judge which ones. That's for the Lord to do, which is a much better job for him. Right. He's much more he is much more equipped to do that than I am. But I think we're starting to see a massive switch in regards to church culture, and I even think as well, kind of just wrapping us back up, but in regards to education too, whether it's a school like Freedom Academy, I hope there's more models like that are happening around the U.S., but we've seen a lot of people go into homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's been really big. Again, no hate to the really good public teachers in there. It's just the system itself is just it's falling. And I don't know, unless we get good people in there, I don't know if we're gonna be able to save it. But I did want to ask a more practical question regarding the academy of how many students you guys have as a whole.
We have 20 this year.
20?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Only 20 students.
Only 20 kids. Yep. Mm-hmm.
20 kids. Mm-hmm. And what's the growth trajectory?
So yeah, I would love to see us get through We have a K3, K4. So that K3 really more preschool, K4 that transitional kindergarten all the way through to 5th grade. I would love to see us get through at least 8. I mean, selfishly, I'd love to see us go preschool all the way through to 12th grade to complete that experience. And I would love to see us have 15 kids in a class. We cap it at sizes there, but if you put 15 kids or so in a class, that's whatever that number gets to, 160, 170. And then I think I would want to open a second classroom. I always want to keep the numbers small in the classroom for all the reasons that we just talked about, right? So I think it's really almost once you get north of 10 or 12, it changes the way in which you're going to interact with those students. It's
the same thing with group discussions. If you have like more than like 10, the conversation will drop.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So it's one of those that I would love to see us. I mean, my vision is it's a multi-site campus, a multi-site academy, and that's something that I have plans for. That's aspirations for me. Right now, we have the privilege to do it at the church there at Freedom House, at our central campus. But we've got other campuses in the city. I'd love to see us be able to expand to those, have our own building at some point in the not too distant future, and really then have even more space to be able to work with. So that's what I see. It was interesting. I'm actually speaking with a young lady next week. She's down in Alabama. They're interested in doing a similar thing too. So I think it's one of those that, for me, and I love the way Pastor Penny said it, it's that alternative to the public school. And, I want us to be very successful, but most importantly, I want kids in a safe environment where they're growing and learning. And I welcome the opportunity to partner with other people nationwide to say, hey, if you guys are thinking about doing this, let's have a conversation about what has worked for us out of the gate, what we're planning in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, things like that. Eventually getting some more facilities, our own space. I have visions. I'm a runner, so I know it's shocking. I know you'd think I'm probably a power lifter, but But it's, hey, we're going to start our cross country team. So that's where I want to see us get to, is not only growing here locally, but having a model that other folks can replicate locally that may feel a little different from the university co-op, but is similar enough. It gives the right flexibility for parents that are in a unique situation. It's not going to work for everybody, admittedly, but I want as many people to have options as possible so that they can do what's right for their families.
That's fair. And one more question in regards to affordability. Where would you put it on that scale?
I feel we are very affordable on that. I think for what we offer, my view is that, it's not just the curriculum. For those that would say, well, if I just bought the homeschool curriculum, it's certainly cheaper. Yeah, hard to refute that, right? But the flip side is, when you look at the biblical principles that are being instilled, when you look at these kids are also learning Spanish, these kids have art, these kids are outside at least twice a day between PE and recess. We have a chiropractor on staff who adjusts our kids on a weekly basis, right? So we've got
That's good.
all those different pieces that I think differentiate us from some of those other universities.
I'm sold on the chiropractor, to be completely honest.
She's fantastic. She's absolutely fantastic. So I think I feel for what we offer, because it is a unique model, I feel very, very good about that. And I feel confident saying that when you look at the teachers that we brought in, some of whom have more than 30 years experience, all of them having at least 20 years experience, but it's not just their experience. It is the love that you watch these teachers, these educators pour into these kids, right? And it's those things. It's the Bible verse that's written in every day. It's the laughter that you hear in the hallways. It's all those things that you just don't always see in other settings. And it's one of those, when you feel that your kid is learning and obtaining a Christian worldview and understanding America's history and its role in the world and your role in that, it's one of those that I feel that's a fair price tag.
I can't disagree with that. I think it's a great way to end our conversation with you, because we've talked for about a couple hours at this point.
Yeah, we're coming up on 2 actually.
Yeah, about 2 hours. But Connor doesn't let me do the outro, so go ahead, Connor. Go ahead and do the outro. I'm not very good at that.
Sam, where can people find out about Freedom Academy and about you and your story?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So freedomacademync.cc is our website. So we do our best to keep that as maintained and up to date. And so that's who we are currently. We're actively working on that to get ready for registration. Registration for fall 23 is going to open January the 2nd. So that will be here before we know it. I am on Instagram. It's the only platform I'm on. It's really, I'm not a very techie guy, so it's really the only one I can kind of figure out. But you can follow me at Sam Taylor Motank, which is Man of Tennessee and North Carolina. So
we'll make sure to put it in the description so we can get it.
Good handle. Right. Good handle. Yeah, we'll definitely get that information in there, and we are looking forward to seeing how the school grows, and we'll definitely have to have you back on when there's an update.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I love it. This has been wonderful. So thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming out. And for us, we're Resident Skeptics. You can find us on all the major platforms. Maybe soon to be Twitter. We're going to see how that one plays out, and then our podcast will be located on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.
Did you say they can watch us on YouTube?
Yeah, all the major platforms.
Oh, wow. You talked about Spotify.
Instagram, YouTube, Facebook.
Oh, did I miss it?
Are you trying to cut into the outro? Because it feels like you are.
Oh my gosh.
She is. She gets in there all the time.
I just wanted to make sure. I'm sorry. Okay.
Sam, thank you so much for coming out. We really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.